So what do we trust these days? Trust seems like it's at an all-time low in almost every area I can think of. And it's easy to turn away from it and instead seek ways to protect ourselves. I have been feeling that the past few weeks after finding out about the Unitarian Universalist church in Plano, Texas, that had the firebomb thrown at its door. Fortunately, no people were hurt and the building didn't have major damage. I've been thinking about that, about our gay pride flag out front, and whether an American flag could fly with our gay pride flag. And it turns out it can't because our flagpole is not high enough. But that's another story. If we want something better for ourselves, our kids, our grandkids, our friends, everyone here in this room, and everyone you love, then we have to cultivate a life of trust, even when it seems like odds are against us. In our reading this morning, Carrie Newcomer challenges us to move forward from distrust to trust by leaning into relational experiences, as what it may at first seem like a hopeless divide can just be changed by leaving room open for love, to create a space where you can have a shared experience. So this morning, we're going to look at trust in the culture at large in our immediate community. I will lean into the work of Charles Feltman, who is actually a business consultant, but I think he's brilliant at addressing this issue of trust, and a little bit from Brené Brown. So people no longer trust institutions, and I dug up a few little statistics for us. This is from a 10-year-old Harris poll. 50% of people don't trust the military. 50% don't trust small businesses. Only 17% of people trust TV news. Only 15% trust major corporations, and only 8% of our population at large trusts Wall Street. I find myself falling into those categories from time to time, and some of those categories more than others. But I still want to believe that I can move on from my distrust into hope. Last winter, I was driving home from the homeless memorial at the library on that the coldest night of the winter, which I think was 40 degrees below zero. And I was a little concerned about whether my car could even manage that. It had never been in circumstances that cold. And so I'm mapping a route to drive by the fast food places that I think might still be open if I'm running into trouble. And then I said to myself, this is Montana. If I get into trouble, I can flag anybody down, and they will help me because they know I could die out there without their help. And I drove home really confidently, trusting in the people of Montana. We use phrases like trust to luck, and in Islam, one of our favorites, of course, is trust to Allah, but tie up your camel. Trust at its core is to rely on or place confidence in something or someone. And I'm going to add, or ourselves, right? Trust is a belief in reliability, truth, ability, strength of someone or something. And looked at more interpersonally, it's where you feel safe, heard, known, and therefore you can feel comfortable in sharing deeper parts of yourself. My favorite in all this research I did was actually a legal definition of trust, as in trust fund. A trust is a relationship in which one party holds title to property subject to an obligation to keep or use the property for the benefit of another. I didn't expect it to be so lovely. It's a relationship, it's an obligation, and it's for the benefit of another. So I really held on to that. The other one is a scene from Star Trek: The Next Generation. How many of you watch Star Trek: The Next Generation? Okay. I need to know that because I don't want to over-explain. But anyway, I'm going to first turn to business consultant Charles Feltman, and then to Commander Riker and Lieutenant Commander Data of Star Trek. Feltman describes trust as choosing to risk making something you value vulnerable to another person's actions. Choosing to risk making something you value vulnerable to another person's actions. It might be your work, might be your reputation, might be your self-esteem, might be your deepest fears and joys. And what a risk. And the inverse, of course, is distrust, which Feldman says, what is important and safe to you is not safe with a certain person in a situation or in any situation with that person. Star Trek, Data is an android, and he doesn't feel emotions, but he's always trying to be human, and he's trying to understand humanity. So most of the episode is about a young woman they had tried to rescue out of difficult circumstances, and they had known her sister. But she abandons them in the end and goes back to the circumstances she was in. Data is quite disturbed by this, as much as an android could be disturbed. It's confusing for him. He can't sort it out. So he goes to Riker, and he said, I was fooled. And I've been thinking so much about this. And Riker says, we both put our trust in her. And we weren't prepared for her betraying us. It never even occurred to us that could happen. Riker says, in trust, there's always the possibility of betrayal, Data. Data muses, well, maybe it's better not to trust. And Riker says, but without trust, there's no friendship. There's no closeness. There are none of the emotional bonds that make us who we are. And Data responds and says, and yet you put yourself at risk. And the scene fades to darkness, as Riker says, every single time. As Unitarian Universalists, we live out the assertions of Commander Riker every single day. We start with our first principle, because it's our bedrock, the worth and dignity of every person. If you're new with us this morning, our Unitarian principles are on the back of your order of service. So we start with the inherent worth, and in that belief, we begin with trust. The belief also emphasizes that relational aspect of the trust. We brave a connection with someone, and hopefully it's based on mutual respect, maybe affection, maybe some reciprocity. Since we no longer trust many of our institutions and many of our leaders, it is so important to our physical and mental health that we find places to trust in our communities, in our friendships, and in ourselves. Trust helps move us in the world in ways that push back against fear, worry, and stress. When trust is absent, we easily move we move from being unable to take small risks and embrace others and then build upon that. Instead, we become obsessive about when we are going to next be betrayed and by whom or what. We're fearful, and sometimes we become fearful to the point of paranoia. Who is out to harm us? And our ability to trust and our ability to be physically healthy and mentally healthy are directly tethered. I don't know if you remember the humorous travel memoir, The Geography of Bliss, I think it was by Eric Weiner. And he explains that he's got a little science in there, and he's also explaining that people with the most trusting attitudes about other people are just happier people. He was arguing a causation, but I think it's a correlation. It's chicken and egg, which one of those really came first? Because if you're happy because things in your life are going reasonably well, it's easy to trust in new situations. But if things aren't going well in one place in your life, without care and vigilance about your thoughts, it is really easy to translate that into all the other areas of your life. I've been betrayed here. What if it's going to happen over here? So we have to be mindful of our thoughts about that, to not generalize. I'm going to go to Brené Brown because she's got some hints for you about what to do in your day-to-day life. And you know, I love her because she's a social worker, and I used to be a social worker before I was a minister. But what I like the most about her is she goes out and collects the data that demonstrates the things we already knew all along, but now we have the science to actually prove it. So she wrote an entire book about trust. It's called Braving the Wilderness, and I think this came out right before COVID, although I'm not 100% sure. And braving is actually an acronym of the things she thinks you should be looking at in her life based on her research. The categories are boundaries, reliability, accountability, vault, integrity, non-judgment, and generosity. She asks us to embrace these ideas from a place of curiosity and learning. And when you are curious and when you want to learn, you will ultimately be trust building because you go with your curiosity and say, tell me more, or I want more of this experience. I'm going to try this on and see how it feels. And she really will tell you unequivocally, you have to trust yourself first. And I'll quote from her, we have to shore up our own self-trust before we can fully lean into trusting others. Because the lack of self-trust is often the first causality of failure, setbacks, and disappointment. We start doubting ourselves and our ability to make good decisions and choices. Yet we seldom think about that as self-trust. And it can become a huge problem because it's hard to give others what we don't think we have ourselves. End of quote. So if you actually saw my newsletter this month, you know I put braving in the newsletter. And if you want to read it, you can go to the website and you can click on newsletter and you'll see it in my column. But braving, so the first one is boundaries. These are all part of having more trust in your life, making it clear what's okay and not okay with you. And you might want to add why. You don't have to, but it's helpful. And at the end of the day, ask yourself, were you true to your boundaries today? Reliability is the second. It's about doing what you say you're going to do. And it's your paid work, your volunteer work, your friendships. It means staying aware of what you actually can do and can't do. What are your competencies? What are your limitations? And you, of course, can see how 1 and 2 are connected together. Boundaries and reliability are definitely connected. And again, at the end of the day, were you true to yourself in that? I always ask myself, did I make time to exercise, or did I make time to just go on that walk that I really wanted to go on? And if not, is there still time? And accountability means owning your mistakes and apologizing and making amends. And you know, I'm pretty big on not being a perfectionist. We all make mistakes. We make them all day long. It's okay to own them instead of trying to pretend they didn't happen. The vault, I think, is a tricky one. Don't share information or experiences that aren't yours to share, because the people around you need to know that confidences are kept. And this is a tricky one because sometimes we want to share something we know about another person. And I think the question we always need to ask ourselves is, why am I sharing this? Am I sharing this because it's coming out of care? I want some other people to know. I want to think through how we might offer care to someone else. But the question is always, why am I sharing this? Or why am I sharing this now? Integrity for Brown it's a quote you often hear from her. Choosing courage over comfort, choosing what's right over what's fun, fast, or easy, and practicing your values instead of professing them. And again, I'll add, we're never going to be able to do that 100% of the time, and that's okay. Be realistic. Non-judgment is, again, asking about what you need. Can you ask for what you need? And this is the internal one. Can you be non-judgmental about when you need to ask for help? And when other people engage in actions you don't understand, can you be curious before you're judgmental? Lastly is generosity, extending the most generous interpretation of intentions and words and the actions of others. And start with yourself. Am I generous with myself today? There are some paradoxical societal practices that go with this as well. Our actions when we want to create trust. So I'm only going to talk about the main four. First one is, which is also Carrie Newcomer's message about the mechanic. People are hard to hate close up. So get close. Proximity counts. Our sister UU fellowship over in Moscow, Idaho, has been surveilled by white supremacists in years past. The minister was followed home 2 years ago. They receive protest letters on a regular basis from conservative people in the community. She counsels her congregants to build relationship with their most conservative neighbors. She says it's harder for them to hold hate for you after you brought them a casserole and good wishes. And at a broader level, it's important to know what's going on with our country, but let's try not to overgeneralize. Let's try to focus on the individuals in front of us. I often think about this with evangelical Christians. I am guilty of sometimes lumping them into one category. And yet I know a fair amount of evangelical Christians. And I actually know a lot of them who don't engage in hateful behavior or judgmental attitudes. They're people, just like me, doing their best. And even though my religious beliefs are different, that doesn't have to separate our humanity. Brene Brown has a bit of a trucker mouth, and she uses profanity. This one is really quite mild in comparison. Speak truth to bullshit, but be civil. And these points 2 and 3 just go together. Stay productive in conversation even when it's difficult. Because she really reminds us the minute we start dehumanizing, dehumanization is the primary instrument of physical violence and also emotional violence. So stay above the politics and the religion. Be courageous and show respect. Be willing to reach out and learn when the conversation gets difficult. Carrie Newcomer and the mechanic didn't have much conversation, but they communicated trust and service and gratitude. They connected around their humanness. And lastly, have a strong back, a soft front, and a wild heart. That true belonging is the power to trust and to be vulnerable. And that's the only way we make deeper connections. So I'm going to shift out of that, and I'm going to move into an odd example, but it is not a trivial one. Some of you won't even know what I'm talking about. Some of you will know what I'm talking about and say, yeah, well, I can roll with it. And some of you are going to have strong opinions, and all of those are perfectly all right. You might have noticed I took down the minister pictures over by my office. Meanwhile, while I was away in July, Christy put up the current photo of me. I didn't know that was going to happen. But I also didn't remove it. Joy is laughing because she's like, how could you know that wasn't going to happen, Margo? All the other ministers are up there. I will laugh too. I didn't know it was going to happen then. Let me put it that way. I did not take down the photos of the former ministers because I didn't want to see their faces. That was not it. I actually lined them up in my office so I could see their faces every time I came in because they inspired me. And I looked at each of their faces and I thought, what did that person bring to this community? But when I took them down, I knew it was going to stir up some things, and I had some worry about the reaction. I knew it was a risk. I knew it was going to feel disruptive. And I promise you, we will find them a permanent home soon. But I also wondered if we could place our trust in a process of serving an additional need. I know you want to see past ministers because you've had relationships with them, and they've made a difference. But I kept looking at that really prime piece of real estate, and for all of you on the live camera, I'm pointing over by my office where the back door is. It's a prime piece of real estate for making a statement about our values. We want to grow as a congregation. We want to honor young people. We want to honor families. And guess what? We have 25 to 35 people here every Sunday evening with the Tenants Advocacy Group. Many of them are younger. Many of them are professional organizers. Many of them have children. So I looked at that real estate and said, what can I put up there? I can put up our mission statement. And I put up the picture of the map of the indigenous communities in 1851. Because we have a land acknowledgement, and we try to acknowledge accurately the history of taking indigenous land. So that's also a statement about our values. So can we trust that our minister photos can find a new and respectful place? I hope so. Can we trust that we can serve both placing our values in visible spaces and our UUFB history? I hope so. I also want you to know people are working on this right now. And I'm happy to receive feedback about it. And I appreciate all of you who have already talked to me about it. So to wrap it all up, because I'm getting long-winded, remember, there is a formula for this. And the first one is trust yourself and honor your boundaries and figure out what you need. Second is trust with those you see often and already are building relationships, like right here in this room. That is also a great place that when you make a mistake, to make reparation, because these are people you have relationship with. It's also, we have our covenant to care for one another. And then we take it out to the streets like we did at the Pride Stroll. And we're going to put our values out at Catapalooza as well as we welcome in the new MSU students. If you want to hear more from Brene Brown, there is a short 10-minute video. If you go to YouTube and you put Brene Brown leaves the audience speechless. She will leave you speechless, I guarantee it. She brings it right into our Unitarian Universalist roots. She says, I'm not going to negotiate who I am anymore. You can be who you are, or you can spend your time out hustling for your integrity. What she means is that you will be looking for other people to validate you. Instead, live into that legal definition of trust. Be relational. Feel a personal obligation to yourself and to who you want to be when you present in the world. And think about how your actions benefit others. It's about sincerity and care and contribution. It's about all of us, like we just heard in service as our prayer, using our knowledge, our expertise, our creativity, our passion to benefit and better our community within our walls and out there in Greater Bozeman. So amen and blessed be.